Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to 13 things from the 1960s kids today will never understand. I've done the reaction to the same video but for the 1970s. I enjoyed it, and now we're doing it to the 1960s. I don't know if there'll be less of you watching from the 60s compared to the 70s or more. I'm not too sure, but we're gonna check this out anyway. I do enjoy this channel and I find the content quite fascinating because it's stuff that I don't have a clue about. But yeah, we're gonna jump into this and see things that I won't understand. And yeah, let's jump into this. Links are in the description to my Patreon where you can see reactions that I can't post to YouTube, and let's jump into this.
There are many things that are completely unique to the 1960s. If you grew up during that time, then you know how different they are from today. Entertainment, culture, and just basic daily routines have changed drastically. So here are 13 things from the 1960s that kids today would never fully understand.
Let's jump into it.
Imagine waking up every single morning, putting on your wristwatch, and then having to wind it so that it kept the time.
Every time you'd wake up?
This is what most people did if they wore a watch, because battery-powered watches were still quite new, and they weren't widely available yet. This was also a time when learning to read a clock was essential, because they often only displayed hands that pointed to Roman numerals or tick marks. Today, you might be surprised to learn that there's a generation of kids that are unable to read analog clocks, because they have grown up never needing to.
I mean, when I was growing up, you'd still look at the clocks and stuff, like in school. But it's not really that essential anymore, to be honest. You just have it in numbers now. Clocks still exist though. I mean, I don't know if they're going to go anytime soon.
If we think about all the extremes we go to with pregnancy today, like no caffeine, no deli meat, making sure we take the right vitamins and supplements, and generally avoiding anything that might harm the baby. But back in the 1960s, mothers didn't change much about their lifestyle after becoming pregnant.
Oof.
If she smoked prior, then she most likely continued to smoke. And if she drank alcohol, well then that usually continued too.
Damn.
Of course our mothers weren't intentionally trying to hurt us, because the dangers of these habits weren't fully recognized. It is funny to look back at photo albums though, to see mom fully pregnant with a cigarette in her hand.
Still smoking a pack a day. Like she's not pregnant. Go on.
Recollection Road is proud to partner with Legacy Box. Get early access to the best deal of the year. Watch until the end of this video to see why Legacy Box is the perfect gift this holiday season. And then visit legacybox.com/recollection for an incredible 65% off.
Go on. Get in
During
money.
the 1960s, the most common way to get to school in the morning was to use your 2 feet and get walking. There was no carpool, and it didn't matter that you were only 6. We were sent off to school on our own and taught how to find our way. Sometimes you tagged along with siblings or a neighborhood kid who walked the same route. So you weren't always totally alone, but parents didn't hesitate to hand you your lunch and send you on your way. Today, very few kids still walk. They either ride the bus or their parents find the time to wait in long lines just to drop off.
I mean, in the UK, many kids still walk. I don't know if it's as easy to just walk to school in the US. Some people obviously will, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's maybe just a difference in culture, because obviously the US is just obviously a lot bigger, and I think it's a lot less walkable in certain cities.
Off and pick up kids. Have you seen some of the car lines at schools these days? One of the great things about walking home from school is that you could always make a pit stop at a store for some candy. Back then, a bit of loose change could get you a nice-sized bag of candy. You could also hang out and get an ice cream soda, a malt, or an egg cream, and you could straddle up to the counter and drink it just like a grown-up. From an early age, kids learned about earning, counting, and spending real money, which is something lost on kids today. Now kids seem to think that plastic credit cards are the only way to pay for things. During the 1960s, toys came with a bit of risk. From science experiment kits that gave off toxic fumes to plastic melting ovens like the Thing Maker. Kids learned early that life was dangerous, and you had to be careful when using certain toys. Back then, a BB gun was considered a toy, and everybody wanted one. Today, toys that pose a choking hazard are pulled from store shelves. But kids in the 1960s were built differently. They didn't mind the burns, scrapes, and scars. They were seen as badges of honor.
Lil Bro does not seem to be enjoying this, man. He's like, get me off this.
In the 1960s, backpacks weren't a thing yet, so kids would carry their school books in their hands.
So people wouldn't have bags at all? Okay, now I've got to understand this more, because I assume people still had bags, but these people just didn't have bags at all. I don't know, maybe they just carried everything. I'm so confused.
Hands or under their arms as they walked to school. So not only did they walk to and from school, but they lugged around textbooks, folders, and papers in their sweaty mitts rather than having the luxury of a bag they could strap on their shoulders.
What?
It would take until the 1970s before backpacks became a thing.
I mean, she's got a little bag, but she's not carrying anything important in it.
Watching movies was a different experience in the 1960s. There was no instant access to popular movies. We had to wait for them. That's because local downtown theaters only had 1 or 2 screens, and the movies would rotate out every week or two. For most of us, there were no multiplexes showing every single recently released movie, and malls were just coming into existence. We did, however, have drive-in theaters, which gave us another option for catching a movie on the weekend.
There you go. I'd love to go to a drive-through theatre, but they're not really common anymore.
One thing about the 1960s that would shock young men and women today was the military draft. With the Vietnam War raging throughout the decade, young men that were 18 would be drafted into the Army to fight in one of the most difficult wars on record. There were some who dodged the draft, but by and large, that generation of young men stepped up, served, and for some, gave up their life to defend their country. Can you imagine if there was a draft imposed on today's young people? Although Americans still have to make sure to register with the Selective Service, lucky for them, the draft has not been needed ever since.
I think the US is still one of the countries that, if they were drafted, would be one of the best off in the world. There's a lot of countries now that would not be well off at all. Like, they're not prepared for this sort of stuff whatsoever. I still think the US is still up there with one of the countries that will be the better off in terms of having to draft people into it if it comes to it, you know.
Remember the joy kids felt when they cracked open the red egg that contained silly putty? You could bounce it or stretch it, and the fascination with using it on newsprint to make an exact copy of your favorite comics was priceless. They do still sell silly putty, but very few households even have newspapers lying around. And kids today certainly aren't reading the comic strips, so the popularity of silly putty is nothing like it was back in the 1960s. With TV programming still being fairly new, the idea of watching TV while eating dinner was a breakthrough for the Swanson Company. The first TV dinner came in a divided foil container that you heated up in the oven, and they became a fixture in family freezers across the country. The novelty of it made Swanson TV dinners.
They were the first, I guess, the first real company to start making like microwavable dinners or like ready-made meals. Is that the case? Because if so, then I guess they are like groundbreaking in that sense. Or was their food just a bit different to the other microwavable food at the time, where it was more like of a meal? I don't know. But obviously nowadays you see this and it's like, oh, we've got this everywhere. But in the 60s or whatever, this could have been like, if you've seen this for the first time and you got like a meal already made for you, you're living good, you're loving it.
Huge. And other companies began to offer their own versions. The idea was especially popular with working moms, and it became a staple of the middle-class American family. This was as close to having pre-prepared food delivered to your home as you could get, because there were no food delivery options at the time. Can you imagine?
Yep, I could not imagine that.
Speaking of food, the 60s offered some foods that would turn the stomach of many young people today. Jell-O now is just a dessert, but back then it was an entire meal.
Is that jelly with peas? Is it tomato or pepper? I think it's tomato. Oh.
Our moms experimented with putting anything in Jell-O, and I mean anything. If you find a cookbook from the 1960s, you can bet it's going to have some type of ham, vegetable, or fish gelatin mold in it. And if you had a mom that made you finish your dinner before leaving the table, well then, you were probably going to be there for a while.
Oh man. Oh man.
If you grew up in the 1960s, Westerns were everything to a young boy. John Wayne was starring in motion pictures, and shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza were what you were watching on TV. Bonanza was also the very first Western that was broadcast in color, so it was always fun to find someone in the neighborhood who had a color TV. And if you weren't watching Bonanza, you were outside with your cowboy hat or coonskin cap on and a cap gun strapped to your side. Not sure the last time I saw a kid playing outside with a cap gun, but in the 1960s, all of us did.
Damn.
Getting your first job in the 1960s meant that you were paid a whopping $1 to $1.50 per hour. This was still a big achievement and meant that you could now earn some spending money that exceeded the change collected from returning cans and bottles. For teenagers during this time, a minimum wage job was more than just earning money. It taught them how to be a good employee. That started with wearing a clean and pressed uniform, being punctual, and working hard. The last time I was at McDonald's, the sign read $15 per hour starting pay. The employees, however, were wearing street clothes, and I waited 20 minutes for the wrong order. Ah, how times have changed.
Come on, man. McDonald's is not an easy place to work.
Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to sign up for the Recollection Road newsletter.
Well, there we go.
Using.
Sorry about that. The frog is back. Growing up in the 60s seemed like a much simpler time. I suppose the interesting part back then is being thoroughly entertained as a child with the fraction of the things we have available today. If I had the chance to go back and relive those years, I would do it in a heartbeat. Well, there we go. I mean, it's still, obviously, for people who live through this, it's a nice little look back, right? And I feel like anyone who grows up in a certain generation will think their generation, like, that's, like, the time that we should, like, sort of be back in, or would just, you know, like, you look back at it, like, those things with, like, fond memories and stuff like that. But I do understand it. And it's cool to see this stuff as well, because I don't know much about this at all. Like, having $1 to $1, like, $1.50 as an average wage is fascinating to know, and it's mind-blowing, but obviously it's also in contrast to how much you'd actually need in those times with inflation and stuff. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Hopefully you enjoyed this and it was a nice little throwback for you if you lived through these times. And yeah, until next time, like, subscribe,